You're listening to Artistic Finance, show 181. On today's show, we have a panel of professionals in the lighting and media area of the entertainment industry, and they are discussing career finances. These guests are theater lighting designer Christina Watanabe, TV lighting designer Mike Grabowski, media designer Zak Borovay, and TV gaffer Seán Linehan. And they all share a smorgasbord of thoughts on rates, contracts, unions, and navigating the financial challenges unique to the live events industry. Links to everyone's websites and everything we mention will be in the show notes or at artisticfinance.com/181. This is the fourth and final live recording we did at LDI 2024. It was such an energetic and fun group of people who also discussed some sort of sober topics that people in the live events industry tend to be uncomfortable talking about. So it's an amazing combination of mayhem combined with real world advice. I had a blast, and I hope that comes across in the recording and that you get to enjoy it as much as I did. Now, note on the audio, it's pretty good, but there are times where there's an audience reaction or a comment that got muted. So if you hear silence or a response to a question that you didn't hear, that is what's going on. And I'm also clarifying this because Mike jokes about the thousands of people in the room, which when I listened back made it sound like we were in an empty room. But we did have an audience of 30 or so, I promise. You just don't hear those reactions because of how I had to process the audio. There's also a couple hums that sneak in, but they're short-lived. But hey, that's the joy of recording live. All right, without further ado, let's get to the show.
You are listening to Artistic Finance, where we help creatives learn about the business of show business.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for being here. We are recording this December 9th, 2024, and we are recording live at Live Design International in Las Vegas. I am Ethan Steimel, a lighting designer recently based out of St. Louis, Missouri, and I host Artistic Finance, a weekly show where we learn about personal finances in creative careers and where we take deep dives into the business and logistical side of entertainment. So today we have a panel that consists of a theatrical lighting designer, a TV lighting designer, a projection designer, and a gaffer. I'm just going to let you each introduce yourself, and you can identify. You can self-label yourself. I've said labels, but you let us know what you are. And let's start all the way down there with Zak.
Hi, I'm Zak Borovay. I identify as the director of media production for Luna Luz or Luna Lux, depending on how you want to say it. And I also, in a former life, was a theatrical projection designer.
Hi, everyone. My name's Christina Watanabe. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a lighting designer, and I also teach here at UNLV.
Hi, I'm Mike Grabowski, broadcast lighting mostly, and he, him, and based in New York and out here for a little adventure.
And I'm Seán Linehan. I am Mike Grabowski's gaffer. Part of the entertainment division of the lighting design group, he, him, and yeah, I'm the guy who plugs stuff in.
I just noticed you guys have beers on the table in front of you.
Yes.
Yeah, we came prepared.
We are a sponsor.
Yeah.
Wow, this is awesome. Okay, so just a disclaimer, because we have alcohol on this table, that as qualified as this panel is, we are all entertainment professionals. We are not financial professionals. So I'm just, depending on what topics we cover today, just know that. Take it all with a grain of salt, and consult a financial professional if you decide to do something. Now, today is, we just decided to have this session last night at 7 p.m., or for some people at 11:30 p.m. So I have no plans for this. This is just a completely open Q&A. So if you have a question at any point, just raise a hand. We have a microphone with some wonderful people over there, and we'll just take questions. So Darius, do you have a question to start us off with?
So my first question, what was the best financial decision you ever made? And vice versa, what was the worst financial decision you ever made?
Mind if I jump in?
Yeah, but
It's the same thing going into the creative arts fields. It is an extremely difficult field to get your feet in and stable financially, but it is also extraordinarily rewarding when you get that moment and when you find yourself able to climb up and make some money doing what you love. So for me, working in the arts was both the worst and best decision I've ever made financially.
yeah, and I'll piggyback on sort of what Seán was saying. I mean, for me, it was exactly that. Coming up into the arts and doing all that has been amazing and rewarding. And for me, the best part, though, was jumping into television. For me, I've always had and struggled with theater because a lot of times, in my experience, it's terribly dishonest about money. And it's very opaque and doesn't like discussing that. And television, in my experience, is much more transparent about it. They're much more willing to say, here's the money. Here's what it is. Give me the best product for that money. And for me, that's a really interesting and good way to work. Where theater, I had always had a combative relationship with finances and working in that end. So shifting more to television and being able to work in a sense of being fiscally honest, both with myself and with the production, was a pretty rad thing to find.
Graduate school.
Yes.
Both for, it was a great opportunity for me, and I've built an incredible network, and I'm so fortunate to that. I have so much money in debt. And as somebody who now teaches graduate school, I'd be the first person to tell you don't go if you don't need to or you don't want to, right? That has to be a decision for you. For me, it was a decision to take on the debt. I was lucky enough to get out of undergrad without any debt. And so I was like, well, all the cool kids have college debt, so let me just do it for grad school. But yeah, that's a big chunk of change that I would say is best and worst.
I think I have two that are tied. And the first one is actually back in the early 2000s when probably in a very immature way, I approached the union, United Scenic Artists, A29, and accused them of what I think I used the word reprehensible behavior for not representing projection designers and basically forcing them to help me organize projection designers because while I had very encouraging parents, I was very lucky that my parents were supporters of the arts. My father taught scenic design, so thankfully they weren't shocked or dismayed when I said, I'm going to go into theater too. But when they saw that I then had a path to, pension and welfare and health insurance and job safety and all these things that until then, projection designers in the same theater as everyone else who did not get, I think my parents were much more happy with my choices. And I would also say that the other part of that would be when I made the switch from going to H&R Block to getting a real accountant.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge.
Especially one that specializes in the industry is such a game changer.
Does everybody on this panel have an accountant? Does anybody file their own taxes?
In theory.
I have a tax criminal.
What? Okay, wait. All right.
So you want to hit pause on the recording?
Who listens to this? Yeah. Who here works for the government?
I have an accountant.
Wait, Christina, were you saying you file your own? Or somebody else does it for you? What's going on?
plead the
Do you not
fifth.
file taxes?
Listen, I'll be president one day. So, things get a little out of hand, but actually, since we're talking about this, I'll advertise this great booth downstairs that says, let's talk about taxes. And they've got hot sauce to give away. And I was like, oh my gosh, you are the people that I need to talk to. Yes. But when I had a financial planner and I went to an accountant, I get such anxiety. Like when we talked about this and you're like, do you want to be my artistic finance podcast? And I was like, listen, I'm not the person that anybody I'll tell everybody what not to do. Right. I get such anxiety around taxes and all of these things. And so, it's just, it's a lot. But when I did have a tax guy in New York who I would also call my therapist because I would just go to his office and cry for an hour. And then he would do my taxes. But then things started going online and remote. And I'm a person who likes to be like an in-person kind of gal. And then I moved around a few different places. So we're going to call me a work in progress.
Okay.
And I do think if you find an accountant. I think the biggest thing for me, I think Seán as well, like finding someone who specializes in the industry, understands why you're going to get 400 I-9, you know, all the documentation going to an H&R Block melts their brain a little bit.
Yeah.
But going to someone who specializes in the industry does take quite a bit of the anxiety out of it. You know, that was a big benefit for me of doing that, of having someone who understands all the union logistics, all of that sort of stuff becomes very beneficial.
And I would say, even if you know, it can be challenging to find somebody, especially if you're not in a major entertainment hub city, but there are plenty of great accountants out there who are willing to learn and grow with you too. Mm-hmm. So I know, like, the one that I used, you know, he's in Maryland and that's where we live, and he didn't totally understand, but he knew everything there was to know about running all kinds of businesses, and we're running a business here. And that was really the thing, that going into one of these, you know, storefront tax places, they want to get you in and out as quickly as they can, because the longer it takes to do your taxes, the less money they make. And so having somebody who wants to work with you and wants to educate you on how to maximize and be more efficient, you know, and I think when we took that first step to having a professional, like, you know, when I surrendered and said, this is more than I can do by myself, you know, because I feel like I didn't experience losing money this year, but I still did on paper. And to have somebody be able to show me, you know, it was like that movie Dave. You remember when his friend comes and helps analyze the budget?
Yep.
So having somebody else, another pair of eyes that's looking out for you, and it really wants to help you grow, I think it's a big change. And it's also, you know, like what you're saying about the lack of transparency in theater. Like I make a lot of jokes about, like, in theater, general managers, the best general managers are the ones that will stab you in the back and then call an ambulance. So having somebody that you really feel comfortable is on your team and has your back and can help give you, like, an extra level of confidence that help we don't get,
and help build best practices.
Yeah,
I think that's also
best practices.
The other thing of, like, oh, right, I should document that throughout the year. You know, helping you figure out best processes has been something that's been a big asset in finding, you know, someone who will grow on that journey, learn the entertainment stuff, learn how those logistics all come together.
Yeah. For the most part, I mean, I think we've met just recently or today for some of us. We're all in this because we're very passionate about what we do and we love what we do. And a lot of us, especially when we're young, would kill ourselves to do this stuff. And so having somebody that can sort of put their foot down and say, no, you need to actually make money and not lose it all the time. Is a nice thing.
I will say, taking that first step of getting an accountant, it's scary when you get the sticker shock, because H&R Block, $49.99, they do your taxes and you're done. You get your return or you don't. You go to an accountant, you spend $500, $1,000, $1,500.
It's tax deductible.
But then
it's all tax
next year.
And it's much cheaper than an audit.
Yeah. Yes.
Much cheaper than an audit. And it makes you feel like a grown-up, it validates your career a little bit if you've ever been a little wishy-washy. But just the security of having a professional look at the numbers that you scribbled on a napkin is kind of great.
Yeah, and I want to say, Mike, you mentioned, like, having somebody that's a professional look over what can you deduct, so which receipts should you save throughout the year. I know when I started out, I just saved, I listened to other people around me.
You would have Bob the stagehand be like, oh, no, I deduct all that.
Exactly. And so I saved all these receipts, and then I got to the end at tax time, and it was like, oh, this actually isn't deductible, or this. So I saved all these receipts for no reason.
Yeah.
And so if somebody does get an accountant, and let's say it's not tax time and you're just trying to get ahead of the curve, reach out to the accountant you're wanting and then say, can you give me that list that you give to people that has
a lot of them just have a form, you know, or something like that, of like a little one sheet.
So,
or in the moment, sometimes if you have a decent relationship, you can just be like, hey, I need to get a new camera. Can I deduct that?
Yeah. But I think once you do it one time, at least for me, once I did it the first time, I was like, okay, I have a pretty good idea what receipts I can save or not save, or what I should worry about. Okay, great. Are there any more questions?
Way back in the thousands of people in the room.
What's your personal views, like your decision points for buy or lease equipment? At what point do you decide it's a better idea to buy it in terms of how long you use it, write off, whatever. For a show, if you're just using it for a month, obviously you can lease it.
I'm an advocate for never buying gear. I hate that idea. Outside of being a rental house or something like this, I work as a designer. There's going to be rare instances where I'm an advocate for buying gear, especially with where gear is right now. 25, 30 years ago, buying a Leica was a solid investment. It's going to last 30 years. The idea of buying a moving light or buying, there's stuff that's interesting and viable buying as gear. I am hard pressed to do that. At that point, I'd rather go to a rental shop, let them take care of paying the rent on housing that gear when I'm not using it. Because there's all those hidden costs to it, right? You have to maintain it. You have to make sure it works. And if you buy the gear, you almost have to double up, because what if you have it on a show and it fails? If you buy a console and you are sub-renting that to the show and your console dies, they don't care. You have to eat that rental. And, there's a lot of those pitfalls. At that point, I rather divest myself from gear and not really touch it. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that some good advice that I got is the best write-off is the money you don't have to spend at all. So if somebody, I do that with per diems, per anything. If I don't have to spend it, like I would much rather get a per diem for something, and then it's just the money that somebody else is paying for it. And then I don't have to bother with it at all.
Are y'all LLCs or C Corps, S Corps? What's your structure or individuals?
Sole
I'm an
proprietor.
employee.
Yeah.
I was an S corp before I joined another corporation or an LLC.
Yeah. Same for me.
Yeah.
So both of Seán and I both work for the lighting design group. So we're employees of a firm. So that's a whole different ball of wax. But prior to that, yes.
So you
yes,
can't
corp.
take personally. That's not.
Yeah,
so-
exactly.
I mean, one thing that I will say, like in terms of gear, when you look at it kind of on a personal level, my sister and brother-in-law both work in TV, and I've learned a lot from them because they are always like, you did what? You do what in theater? That one thing they talk a lot about is the kit rental,
Yes.
which kind of doesn't exist in theater, even though
Yeah.
it should,
Very.
except in sound. Those
Yes.
guys rent everything down to the mouse on their computer. And I'm like, so I have to have my own.
I will say that is the grand exception for me, is a kit rental.
Yeah.
Like I have a Pelican of just odds and ends. It is non-heavy investment. It's a switch. It's a printer. It's a Swisson. It's odds and ends of tools that I am going to carry. I am a huge advocate for that in theater. A kit rental is an abomination, but that does not happen in theater.
Yeah. And
For the amount of stuff everyone brings and tacitly gives away for free
right.
is ridiculous.
Right. I'm expected, if I'm, designing media for a Broadway show, and part of this is stuff that I've learned as we develop the membership in the union of like, what are the things we can and can't negotiate for? So like, we were able to convince producers, like anything you're going to see on that stage costs money. It's like, it's pixels that are the wood and the nails and the glue and the paint and everything. But I'm still expected to own a computer and have my own version of Photoshop that I have to pay for, and, have all the cables that I need that will interconnect my stuff with whatever the rental package is. It's like a major cultural shift to try to convince people now to move beyond that. And part of it is like just the way technology changes. It's very hard to keep up, especially in a theatrical situation where, you're going to get to see your cue one time, maybe, if you're lucky. You want to have tools that will empower you to be able to be efficient. And it can be an uphill battle sometimes explaining why you need to have this stuff and why they should pay for allowing you to use it.
I feel like in the LORT contracts, though, that's been taken care of in terms of design reimbursables. And I mean, maybe I don't know how much you're getting to unions and everything like that, but unions are great and they negotiate great contracts. So I know, like for my reimbursable expenses for a LORT B show, I have $500, which
How much does Vectorworks cost, though?
Yeah. You know what I mean? And
more than that. But I'm also like, that's
more
one
than
show.
that is a good
Right.
point.
So I can separate that out because I'm on the whatever rent controlled version of that. So I'm like 700 or something.
It's closer
Right.
to 1,000 now.
Sure.
It went up this year.
Yeah. So, but like, across like, yes, that, my light right, my computer.
but conversely, like a kit rental in a television scenario is $300 a day. that then becomes a viable, not necessarily source of income, but is truly paying for what you're bringing. Sort of like what Zak said. How much is a Photoshop subscription? How much is all that? How much is your amortized laptop? How much is all those adapters? Like, it all adds up remarkably quick. And there's a weird expectation for, even young designers to come to the table with a lot of that stuff. And it's not really a great setup, When you're talking kit fees, that is the appropriate defrayment of what those costs are.
But I do think you can advocate in that way. So, for example, like Vectorworks now you could do a month-long subscription. So I will ask the theater to buy that month-long subscription for my assistant.
Sure.
Because I don't expect them to have that.
I mean, I absolutely agree with that. I will say that there's also been times, at least in projection design world, where they'll look at it and go, this person's asking for that and this person's not. Yeah. So we should go with the person who's not because it's going to be cheaper.
Oh, I asked for it after I signed the. I signed the contract first, and I was like, by the way, this is an expense.
Oh, that's smart.
I just want to say things. On this show, we interviewed Asia Jackson, who's a Broadway associate, and she's worked for Bradley King on shows. And when Bradley brought her on, he said, okay, so here's things. There's the assistant contract, because Christina, you're talking about the designer contract has stipulation for, $500 or something for reimbursable expenses, but that's not the assistants associates. I feel like assistants and associates can advocate for themselves, but they have to know to advocate for themselves. So I assisted on 2 Broadway shows. My designers, nobody ever told me, ask for a kit fee. And the other thing Bradley told Asia to ask for was for after midnight, take a cab or something, like pay for a cab. So
that's funny. I take that part for granted because especially in television.
Correct.
That just.
And I feel like that's a little bit of divide here, where it's an expectation in the television with, let's just say, larger paychecks and larger budgets, things like that, just an expectation that's baked into it. You can advocate for it in theater, but it's a lot harder because there's just not a lot of money to go around. And while the union is taking care of the designers, we do need to get the kit fee into the assistants and the associates. And it also needs to go up because $500 for a show, like we did, the episode we did last year at LDI was about the cost of software and all that. And the way I look at it is we all roughly spend $5,000 a year on software and computers. And, so if you think of a kit fee either daily or weekly, and weekly tends to be in theater, you do a weekly, like whatever the kit fee would be. But it's 5,000 divided by 52 weeks. And you can, in my brain, it's like, well, that's an easy starting point for a kit fee. So I'm so glad we're talking about it because in theater, it's getting traction. But Broadway is really like the only place where assistants and associates are getting it, but they're only getting it if they ask for it and if they advocate for themselves.
Right, yeah. But I think it's also a verbiage thing, right? Because I think a Broadway producer can just kit fee, that's your television-y nonsense and verbiage of, great, it's my technology fee. Or it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think a lot of times when we're putting together budgets for my projects, we have what has always been labeled in the project as like design fee. Mm-hmm. And that is, we know about it. You know what goes into that time and effort, but a producer often doesn't. So we've had to relabel it. It's design fee, including meeting, survey, but, really breaking down what is a design fee. And it's literally 10 or 20 words on our budget that I would say since we put that in, it's knocked out about 90% of the questions about it. Design fee, what is that? That's not words, that necessarily translate. But they understand, you're coming to meetings. You're coming to that survey. You'll do it. I think little explainers like that, because we often get so caught up in lingo that becomes so insular that we realize sometimes we're not talking to the people who necessarily know the lingo, that odds and ends.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm going to try my best here not to feedback sitting in front of the speaker. But no, it's sort of like we need the opposite of what used the old C47 line item. We need to say, hey, look, sound designer is the best example here. If I'm coming in with my adapters and componentry kit, this needs to be rented or else I can't verify everything's going to work.
Right.
And I feel like video, the fact that everything's USB-C now is, I've got my bag of 48 adapters. One of these will help us, but also DVI comes in 8 flavors. Which of these adapters is going to work? I need to have them all available. So it really is clarifying that line item to the point where there's not going to be a question.
It is so amazingly, for 10 words of verbiage, it goes miles. And realistically, going the other way of saying, no matter what, this show needs all those adapters. Do you want to pay the rental shop or do you want to pay me that money? And more often than not, you have that personal relationship and are having that face-to-face. Like, Oh yeah, screw that. I'd rather give you the $200.
And this also goes to help against the whole, kit fees of the film thing. It's
Correct.
the redefining the same thing in a way that they understand. And they're going to say, oh, that's not here.
Correct.
I want to piggyback real quick. Y'all are speaking from a design perspective.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm not a designer. I'm the guy that plugs in the design. And there's an expectation that I show up with a workbox full of tools, full of gear, full of odds and ends. Like, yes, you have your adapters, you have your meters, you do time, and your brain is largely what you're being paid for. And that's all super important. But if I were to show up with just my time and brain, like,
I've seen it. It doesn't plug in well.
It's not good. It's not good. But like, my brain won't hang a light. My brain won't do power distribution, or my brain will do power distribution, but like it won't do the physical distribution of the power. And so there is an expectation that I own a small amount of gear. To tie back to the question from way back when about buying gear versus renting gear, on a technical side, I will say there is a small amount of gear that you should own. You should own a small power distribution system. You should own a small data distribution system, something that you can throw in line that is yours, that can be your Hail Mary, your rescue, your football. You don't rely on it. You rely on a rental, but you own that as the absolute backup for when the rental fails or you're stuck in Las Vegas where it never rains and all of a sudden it's raining. Yeah, we've dealt with that. But like that kind of stuff. So it from a design perspective, I think owning gear is...
But even still, sort of piggybacking on what you're saying, I still own a little 4-port PoE switch. I have a little 2-port node. I'm not investing catastrophic amounts of money into it, but it is that emergency product, you know.
And I'll also throw in like, yes, I'm an employee of a firm and I convince them to buy the gear for me and they insure it, they store it, they keep it. But I've only been an employee of the firm for a year and a half. I've been a freelancer with the firm for 20 years. And for those 20 years, I was buying that stuff. And, you know, through clever relationships with shops and other designers and other gaffers, we stored stuff in places and did things like that. So there is a gray area about buying and owning gear. I will never advocate for buying a light, though. Don't ever buy a light.
And I want to say in theater, the programmers, lighting programmers, they tend to have a kit fee, and that's an expectation.
Correct.
Because everyone looks over there and sees a bunch of stuff, and it makes sense for them.
Correct.
But
It's
then-
a visual thing.
Yeah.
Of seeing.
So we should just have random stuff at our table
Yeah, exactly.
at any given
100%.
moment. Yeah.
Exactly.
Do you mean like rubber ducks?
It sounds ridiculous.
Just put my
but
lunch
it's
in there.
true. It's the optics.
I will say that part of that too is sort of walking the line between artistic and technical, and that especially in the earlier days of my career when we would be the projection designer would be the person that had 16 monitors at their tech table and stuff. People thought I was the IT guy.
Yeah. The mini NASA space
Yeah.
station. Yeah.
And I had to say, no, I'm designing here. I'm not the IT guy. I can't fix your computer.
Yeah.
And you can't control the air conditioning.
Right.
That's also the other
That's
question.
sound.
Yeah.
There was another question out here.
So I had one, but now I have two questions because of what you brought up. So when you are a W-2 employee, because when you're working on a 1099, you can write off those purchases. But when you're on a W-2 and you're purchasing this gear, how are you doing that? Is it justified in your employer storing it for you? How do you kind of make it worthwhile in that way?
So currently, I will do everything in my power to get my employer to buy it for me. And if they say no, and then I go and buy it, I'll go do one 1099 job.
Okay, fantastic. But my question is about the recent LORT negotiations on a more design perspective, because with the new LORT theaters can now put assistants on LORT contracts and to gain union points. But I've always been nervous to ask in a way because what's in it for the theater? Nothing is kind of the answer, or is there? And what would you say about asking for that and kind of how to go about that as an assistant?
Yes, do it. Yes.
But can they just
but-
say no?
No, I don't think so, to be honest. Like if that's my understanding, and I haven't quite followed what the new outcomes are with the assistants, but I know, for example, even when I was working as an assistant off Broadway before assistants were being recognized off Broadway, I asked to be put on an 829 cover sheet And who did I ask? I forget who. Somebody was like surprised and then was like, "Oh yeah, I think we can do that." So that was to the credit of the theater of doing the right thing. If you are in 829, are you saying you are, or you're trying to get points? You're trying to start your pension.
But a lot
Okay.
of theaters will, because right now at the recent negotiations, from what I understand, they have the choice to do it or not, and you can ask for it. But then they're paying into pension when potentially they don't need to be, from what I understand.
I mean, if legally they don't have to, then legally they don't have to. I would say that it depends on your relationship with the theater, and also get your design, like get the person you're assisting involved, because I go to bat for my assistants all the time because I do have that power. I know when I was coming up, that's what I needed. And
there are certain points where, like, we will hire 829 designers and things, and we're stuck at a budget point, right? We've already pre-negotiated the contract with whomever, and then we'll have somebody come on and ask, can we make this an 829 contract? And a lot of times we can manipulate the way that works in terms of ultimately the client is getting billed X amount. We can pay you Y. Now we can go backwards from there if we want to take part of what that payout to you is and take down from there, and your base goes down a little, but the full number comes into what the P&E is on the 829. They're still in the end getting the same amount. It's just shaping how that number is being distributed.
As a very last resort.
Don't take that. Yes, please. That is not a good.
If it's that or
start
nothing.
there. Yes. If it's that or nothing, that's one to have in your pocket. That's always been a emergency bailout in those scenarios.
And I know producers hate when I say this, but like budgets aren't real, and the IRS hates when I say this, and like numbers are imaginary, right? So if your fee is $1,000 to assist, and they're supposed to come up with, what is it now, like 13%, so like another $130 to cover your P&W, they'll find that. They will. That's going to exist somewhere. I was bringing an assistant. I wanted to bring an assistant on the show, and the artistic director was like, "Oh, let me see what we might have in the education budget to help finance your assistant coming in here." They're gonna find it.
Yeah. But I will say, my experience has, when I was coming up, I was very blessed to work with this woman, Wendell Harrington, who is basically, we call her the godmother of projection design. So all projection design came from her. And she took the maternal part of her job very seriously and felt like it was her job to advocate for me and protect me and make sure that I was taken care of, because I was nobody to these people and she was the name. Part of that sort of pay it forwardness of it is that I have always felt like it's my job now to do that for my associates and to let them know that I am always here to help you. You know, my world is for you, because if they're unhappy or if they can't do their job, then my work is going to suffer. I feel like it's my duty to make sure they get whatever they need, even if it's like I have to call the GM and say, this guy's not going to get his health insurance if you don't pay him by Friday. Like, I'll do that. If you are working with a designer who won't do that, I think that, send them to me.
Yeah, like we'll shame anybody.
We love shame.
I was going to say, I think you two are currently in the minority with that experience, but that's really awesome.
Tell me names afterwards.
Yeah. Hard. Oh, and we got a friend over here too.
I would even go a step further, and I make statements. Instead of saying, will this be on site? I would say, this will be on site. Can you confirm?
That way you know that you put it on the table and they won't be surprised.
And that way, if it is not provided, then it was in that documentation.
Yep. Right. They may not change the contract, but if they say, oh, don't worry about that, it's taken care of, they're going to have to respond in writing because you put it in writing. So that's the best way to cover your ass, because you're not going to wind up with like a Zak every time, just on good stuff.
All right, Darius, there's a question here, and then let's go there after that. Okay. And then also, a lot of people have said a lot of things here. If you have a very specific instance that you want to answer to, what I would say is write that actual very specific scenario that you're currently in into an email and send it to like 3 or 4 designers, including maybe even these people up here, because they've said they'll help you. Yeah. Okay.
I just have a question. How do you go about dealing with venues or companies that may not pay you as well, or may be slow to pay as an up-and-coming designer when you need to have those jobs in order to build your resume and to get your name out there? How do you deal with those?
Baseball bat.
Mm-hmm.
No, I've literally gone to somebody's office and was like, you need to pay me for this work.
If you have a friend who's a lawyer and can just put that Esquire at the end of an email, that goes a long way. You don't have to be legally represented by them, but the fear of it is enough.
And I think part of it too is on the front end, doing your research. Talk to your friends, talk to your fellow designers, see if people have those reps. If there's a reason a job is coming in and seems a little too good to be true, there's probably a reason. It's not a big community. You know, you can find somebody who's worked at that theater, worked for that producer. How long does it take to shoot out a couple emails of, hey, I got a job over at, XY joint. You guys worked on it? Yeah, it takes them 60 days to pay you, but they'll always pay you. And then it becomes your choice. If you hear that coming in, that's what they're known for. Again, unless you put it in writing beforehand too, that's its own thing. But I always advocate doing a little research on your clients.
And so before I joined the union, I tend to get paid on opening night, and it was one fee. And then after joining, set up contracts. So it's like you get a third of the fee when you sign, a third when the plot is due, and then a third at opening. So even if you're not in a situation like that, as you're discussing with the company, maybe ask, hey, can I have, half on signing or half when the plot is in or half at focus or half at this, try to get it in little pieces. Because yes, nobody has any money, right? But if you can get if you can get your money a little bit at a time, then at least it's the sooner that you're going to get your money.
Earlier in my career, I was guilty of being a big into shaming. Especially like when I was talking earlier about how, when I started and projection designers weren't in the union. A great example is the show Rock of Ages, which I designed in 2009 when it was on Broadway. It was the first time a Broadway projection designer ever got a union contract. How did I get it? Well, first, I had a kid in February of that year, and I sent a photo of the baby to the general manager and said, do you feel that he does not deserve health insurance? Mm-hmm. And they said, our hands are tied. There's no collective bargaining agreement. It says we have to give this to you. And ultimately, I went to the other designers and said, can you all refuse to sign your contract until they offer me one also? And they did. And so, there's strength in numbers in that way. So most of the time, especially if you're a younger designer, you're there because somebody else wanted you at the table. So if you guys can all stand together and say, we all want fairness. I don't know if you guys have ever dealt with this, but every time they say this thing is favored nations, I'm always like, is it? Can I see what everyone else is getting? I'd really like to know.
Yeah, I just open that group text.
Yeah. So really, hopefully we're all pals on this show and we can lean on each other because they want you there and you want to be there with them. So if it's an issue, then, gang up on them.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Yeah. For young designers, when you're working as an electrician one day and then a designer the next, and you're working in all these different environments, how do you keep track of all the contracts that you're signing? And then if there's any additional benefits to the contracts, if it's you're off-road designer, or joining trying to join the USA 809, or if you're working at a high school, sometimes they'll give you a little benefit, or you can opt into a benefit for it. And then how do you keep track of making sure you get all those tax documents at the end of the year, making sure they're being sent to the right address and everything like that?
Google Sheets. It's dead serious. There's
Excel
so
file.
many resources out there, templates and things that we as a community have shared with each other. Set yourself up a Google Sheet and just make sure you check it every day. It's developing best practices, going back to the accounting process questions, develop your best practices early.
And I will say, one of the things I did early on, I always had problems with presenting the designer side and the money side and balancing what that is. So I just set up a whole separate email that was my assistant or my office associate. It was still mine. It was just, Janine at MTG Designs. And that was, Janine would answer or respond to stuff. That way I could take it off my plate. And that way I could still have artistic conversations with people. And there are points where you're having to deal, especially young designers, having to deal directly with the director about money and all. And that can get awkward. So by being able to sort of separate those two was a real kind of nice cheat in a way. But to your point, it was a way of also housing a lot of those benefits, then it was just all in that email. And it was a way to sort of silo some of that stuff, but a way to sort of separate you from the financial conversations that can sometimes get awkward by having this sort of sham email
Having someone
address.
else to blame.
Yeah, exactly. Because, oh, you know what? I'll go talk to them. I bet you I can get them to get the number for you, you know. And it gave you a way to sort of play the game a little bit without you as the designer necessarily having to sort of take the hit in a way, if that makes sense.
That's good. I mean,
So,
Jeanine says we really need to make another $200 this month. So
you know what I mean? But it's nice to have that sort of false target that's not coming from you, you know? So.
Yeah. Another thing that I did early in my career, before I had formed an S Corp, is I set up a separate bank account. And I knew this bank account, everything that comes in is, you know, money from a job, and everything that goes out is money being spent on a job. And that way, at the end of the year, I could get the PDF of that bank statement, and which I would say, oh, here are all the deposits. Let me make sure I can cross-reference this with what I'm expecting for the tax paperwork.
And the way I do it is I have a Google Sheet, and like I was mentioning earlier, get the list from the accountants. That's like, what can you deduct? So I have like a header for like, I don't know, per diem or whatever.
Right.
And I keep track of it all just in a giant list. And then I also keep a track of my W-2s and my 1099s, how much I'm supposed to be paid. So if you're ever not paid, you can certainly look there and be like, oh yeah, that show I did randomly in March, I never got paid for. And then the other thing is this last couple of years, now granted, I've been moving states all over the place the last couple of years, but there was like 6 1099s and or W-2s that I didn't get last year, but I still report it on my taxes as that amount. And this has happened to me in the past where they maybe will send it to me the next year. Like I did the work in 2016, they sent me the 1099 in 2017, but I knew I had already written it off in my previous taxes. And I just showed my list to the tax person, and they said, oh yeah, you're good. You did it correctly. And you don't have to worry. Like no one's going to come after you for not reporting this to you.
Because I don't remember when it happens. It's maybe sometime in May that you can go onto the IRS website and you can access all of the 1099 forms that have been sent, because the company sends one to you and one to the IRS. So at some point, some months in, the tax person in St. Louis was telling me this. I'll get you her name.
I didn't know this.
Yeah. Like you can go to when you don't do your taxes for a couple of years, she's like, all of this information is just online. You just have to do this. And I was like, just please take my money. It's like, somebody just give me a number. Tell me how much money you need.
Okay, that's good. All right. And they also
look into that.
Little sidetrack here, but irs.gov or whatever, you can set up an account for free. Well, they just automatically have one. And you can go in and you can see how much you have made and paid into Social Security for the last few years. Now they've changed that recently, so they're combining everything. So now it's login.gov. So irs.gov or whatever doesn't really exist. I mean, it exists.
It's the broad spectrum governmental login.
Correct. So I've logged in recently for an episode, and I saw what I'm getting in Social Security in theory in the future. I did not know that you can actually see the 1099s broken out. So I have to figure out how to do that. But that's awesome. Thank you for saying that out loud.
So a question is, we were sort of talking about having somebody else go, like putting it on someone else for the negotiation and stuff. Do you think an agent is worth having? Do you have one? It's kind of been this new big thing in design, especially to have an agent represent you. What are your opinions on that?
I had an agent for a little bit, and then pandemic. I think the thing is that you don't. So it was, I'm mixing up this, but it's something about like you don't need an agent until you do. So I know many people that their agents have gone to the bat for them in cases. I will say for me personally, I did not have that experience where a show that I did moved into a commercial production and I was not brought along with the production, and my agent was like, it's not really worth fighting, which I think, she was right in saying that, but I was like, oh, bummer. Isn't that what an agent's supposed to do? And I think it depends on the relationship with the person. So I think it's good to find an agent that wants to work with you and wants to help your career grow. For me, I felt like the negotiating that I can do, I would say, can I have more money? Which is what my agent would also say. And like, can I have these extra benefits and everything? Because that's not, you're not only negotiating money, right? You're negotiating, I want more money. I want an assistant. I need a car for the entire time that I'm there. I need housing, make sure I have a private housing with private bathroom, blah, blah, blah. So what I discovered in my case is that all of the things that my agent was negotiating, were things that I could do. And I was like, well, there's an extra 10% that I can just put in my own pocket. And also my career shifted as I started to become full-time in academia, and I just started reducing the number of shows that I did and continuing to work with theaters I worked before, where I was like, I can just do this by myself. Sometimes an agent is really helpful in connecting you to other productions, connecting with other designers, other directors, putting your name out there for things. That's my experience with agent. I know a lot of my friends have agents who they really like.
Zach, I'm curious, just because you're now working with Luna Loose. Did you have an agent before, or when do you still have one?
I don't anymore. Similarly, my agent ran screaming during the pandemic, and I never got another one. It's a very tricky thing. I mean, I feel, and maybe this is more of a sort of the bubble of New York than it is globally, that one of the great misconceptions, both for the union and for agents, is that they get you work, and they don't. Both of them, I think, are there to help protect you and guide you and help you make better choices and make sure that you're not taken advantage of. And that agents, it's a really weird, intimate relationship that you have with this person, because they know how much money you make, and they know if you need a private bathroom and all those things like that. And, sometimes you have close friends that don't know that stuff. And I remember early on when I got my first agent that he was also really taking the step from being a junior agent to a full agent. And there were maybe like 19 projection designers in all of theater at the time. So there was like one agent who was the guy I really wanted to go with, but he was like, I already have my one projection designer, so I'm not going to take on another. And one of the things that I learned is, like, one of the ways they kind of can get you work is they have the ability to sort of offer a package. So, I represent this scenic designer and this lighting designer and this projection designer and this costume designer. So you called me about this costume designer. Would you also be interested in these other guys? So there's that. There's the idea that this person might be able to help open a door that you don't know how to open yourself, whether it's they represent a director that you really want to work with, or they are willing to reach out to, some theater that you really want to work at and help make that introduction. But you still end up having to do the real work. You got to sell yourself, because they can only open the door. But I have also found, and there's a quote that I think about a lot from the Frank Zappa book, Frank Zappa's autobiography, where he talks about how the nature of an employee and the boss is that the employee hates the boss because the boss has the unmitigated audacity to pay the employee. Like what you're saying with the sort of fake assistant is just like, it clouds the relationship when you have to also negotiate about money, because there have been times where I've been in like a general manager's office and I feel like I'm a crack addict and I need my next fix, because I'm like, I did this work, where's my money? And I feel bad that I am the person asking for it. But I've also found, I think things have changed, especially post-pandemic. And there's so much more transparency, and like everybody kind of grew up. I'm very lucky to have an organization that I work with where I can have people that, there's checks and balances, and they go, it says business class. And if you don't take business class, then you're telling them it's okay not to give you business class. I might not have thought of that on my own. So having somebody to remind me of that. But I'm also married, and my wife can remind me of that. No offense.
Also, to advertise the Artistic Finance podcast, if you go back like 10 episodes, we did one called Pay Negotiations for Lighting Designers, and we do talk for an hour about agent, no agent, subtleties like that. And then, not today an episode came out, but next week's episode is with designers and agents, and I have 4 sets where a designer is paired with an agent, and we talk for 90 minutes about a lot of this stuff. So There are lots of answers and thoughts about.
Did you talk about the agent versus lawyer thing? Because there are some designers that have lawyers and not agents.
Correct. So that's 10 episodes back. We discussed that there.
I'm
just curious, Mike and Seán, because you guys work for LDG, so I assume you don't have agents, or is
correct? Even freelance before I joined LDG, it never quite made sense for me. One of the things I've always found tremendously strange was, as small as theater always is and was, somehow the television industry is that much smaller.
Shocking.
Which was a really weird realization jumping into that. But that meant a lot more of those face-to-face negotiations are a lot easier. They're right there. So it was never having to reach very far or having to have too many doors open to get there. There was a lot less impediment to those points. So at that point, when I was moving into television, it didn't really feel like it made great sense for me. And then a few years later, I joined LDG in the firm. So that much less sense for me.
And gaffers don't have agents.
I'll be your agent. I'll be your agent.
And I will say also, like, I have now not pivoted, but I do a lot of theme park work. And in 2014, I remember I was offered a project for Disney in Shanghai, and the contract was like 90 pages long. And my agent just was like, I don't know how to deal with this.
Yeah. At that point, the lawyer is a much more valuable resource.
And I do think, as you sort of move out of, we're very lucky in theater that these contracts kind of all look the same. When you move out of that into the architectural world and dealing with large corporations and things, it's good to have somebody who knows how to read all that legalese to help tell you what it really says.
Yeah, very much so.
And I would say, even if you are working for a corporation or if you're getting into a W-2 job, always ask for more money. Like, just right off the bat, every single time, ask for more money. If the answer is no, then okay, great. That's still, nobody in the history of anyone has ever been like, what? You asked for more money? I'm going to unoffer you this job. You're talking to another human being who also knows that you need money to live. Like, so I think being shy about asking for money or asking to get paid, it's like, that's not yes, we live in a capitalist hellscape. You need the money to live. Don't be shy.
Going off of that point about asking for money and Zak's point about selling yourself, I feel like there's a specific part of the design industry that kind of expects some work for free, especially if you're...
Screw that. No.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. I'm going to just start right there.
But there's like instances where maybe you're young, you're trying to get a specific client or like get the big name, but they want like maybe a rendering, an idea. They want to talk to you, pay for your, like, how do you get paid for that time? Does that even have its place anymore after COVID?
Go for it.
I was going to say, I think that it's a valid question. We'll use like an example for a Broadway show. You're the lead designer for whatever you're doing, and let's say your fee is $30,000. Now, this kind of ties into what I've said about the lawyer versus the agent. The agent always gets a percentage. It's in their best interest to work as quickly as they can, because then, if time is money, the less time, the more money. For a lawyer, they get paid by the hour. So the more time, the more money. So you have to kind of look at it like that for yourself too. And you say, okay, I think this job's going to take me 6 weeks, and I'm going to charge $30,000. And how much is that per week? And then you kind of have to figure out, like, what kind of milestones do I need this contract to say in order to keep this realistic? It wasn't until like halfway through my theatrical career where I started to dictate in my contracts how many site visits I would be willing to do. I worked a lot at the Huntington Theater in Boston, and I would just be like, it's exciting. They want me to go to Boston. And then eventually I was like, I missed my kid's concert.
Oh, crap, I need to go to Boston.
Yeah. So I was like, I will go to Boston twice. If you want me to go a third time, that costs extra.
Correct. To me, it's that stuff. Yeah. The specificity is really important with that. Again, if they're asking, like, give me a quick sketch or a doodle, fine, that's different. But that's okay. We're rolling that, encapsulating that. I'll justify that against the broader design fee. You know what I mean? But aggregating out what the hours are, what you're putting into that. The idea of doing anything for free is Looney Tunes. The idea of, oh, come on, do this for experience. No, that's Looney Tunes.
Well, but it's also
Yeah.
tricky too. People will want you to work for spec, right? So they're saying, we're thinking about hiring you. What would this design look like? I'm like, no, you can have a conversation with me about the themes of the play, how I like to work. Here's some examples from other shows that I've done. Here's my set rendering for this show, and here's what the final product looked like. You can try to build trust using this work that already exists.
In the 2009 USA collective bargaining agreement, that became against the rules.
Yeah.
Ask for design on spec.
Right. But I mean, for people who who aren't there, just like giving you terminology in order to protect yourself, you can say like, listen, this rendering is going to take me an entire day to do. I don't have the time for that. Let's meet for coffee. Let's meet for something, because do people work per spec in like the film industry or something?
That is like Looney Tunes.
Right.
Like the idea of even considering that, to me, is an insult to what
I won't even read a script without an offer. Somebody's just like, oh, we're thinking about having you. Are you interested? Here's the script. I was like, yeah, let's meet. And somebody will be like, what do you think about the script? And I'll say I didn't read it, because that's going to take time out of my life for work. Like,
it's work.
Exactly. For maybe for this like little dangle. No.
I mean, I think one of the dangers in that, I agree about like not to do any work for free, is that sometimes they're also like, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes there, that I feel like sometimes, and probably much more in theater, commercial theater, than any other kind of theater too, that it's almost like what we call a bake-off.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, well, let me see what Richard's ideas are, and then I'll see what Fred's ideas are. And if Fred has better ideas, we're going to go with that. But I loved that one idea that Richard showed us, and I'm going to have Fred do that too.
Implement that. Yeah, like, to me, it's realizing that our work is money. Even reading scripts or doing a quick doodle or stuff like that. Going for coffee, great. Let's make sure we're going to vibe, make sure I'm aligned with the project for you. Fine. That's research. That's this. That's fine.
I always say the first meeting's great.
Yeah, exactly. And I get it. It's hard to build it's a chicken and the egg. How do you build your portfolio without doing that? But, without coming off combative and all that. It's a balance, but I'm hard pressed to say there's any reason you do a project on spec or anything. Like, that's goofy.
Okay, we're at time. Does anybody have any quick questions before we? Okay, I have one quick question. If we can just do like a fire round.
Ooh.
You've said a lot of good stuff. If you could give a piece of financial or career advice to somebody that's starting out and is going to become you or do what you're doing, what would be something that you would say, do this starting out, or do this to set yourself up?
Oh gosh. Don't worry about the tools and the gear. Worry about the people you're learning from. Don't go with the person that has the biggest utility belt and can tell you, or chest harness. If you see somebody with a chest harness, walk away. But just maybe there are people here at this conference right now that have a wealth of knowledge, and there are people here at this conference that have a wealth of gear. Go for the knowledge.
You know what? There's two quick things. First, learn to talk about anything but whatever you are designing or working on. We all work in cold, dark rooms for an extended period of time, and I want to be able to talk to you about sports, your dog, anything but what we're doing at a certain point. Like, I want to just not talk about nerd stuff for 5 minutes, Knowing how to talk about anything else is huge. Have other interests, have other things. The other thing I also tell a lot of folks, and it sounds not great, we're all designers for the most part, and a lot of times we see design on this magic scale, whatever 0 is to perfection, to whatever that is. Most of our clients only see the first 4 or 5 steps. So once you hit a magic level of proficiency, and I don't claim to be able to deign what that is, we're really the only ones who know those upper steps. So much of it then becomes about who you are, your personality, being able to talk to people, sort of relating what I just said, of being able to talk to people about whatever else and being able to hang out in the room with them. And I think that's something to hang on to.
Don't get behind on your taxes.
Yes.
And also take $5 and start a retirement fund right now. Right now.
So I would say all of those things. And then I would add to that, ask for what you think you're worth, not what you think they will pay you.
Awesome. I love it. I don't want to harp on you on the taxes.
I'm going to come out of here in handcuffs.
But we have actually had, this is going to be like episode 180 or something like that. I've had a lot of these conversations, and there have been 5 or so people who, for years of time, did not file taxes, and they're alive and doing just fine. And so I'm just curious, have you solved this? Have you filed it, or are you in the midst of it now?
I'm in progress. So, and actually I sought out, there are financial therapists. I was like, this is what I need. And then I Googled it. I was like, oh my gosh, they exist. And there is one located here in Las Vegas. However, when I reached out to her, she's just like, my clientele has a minimum of like $1 million in assets. And I was like, oh girl, that's not me. So yes, I'm,
but all I'm saying is, if you do mess up on your taxes, it's fine.
Yeah, I still have a house.
Everyone's just like it's never too late to go to the dentist.
Oh yeah.
Also, by the way, I had a lot of cavities. Everyone, twice a year, go to the dentist
and get your eyes checked. Right, go to the doctor. We love all these things.
Self-care,
all wearing glasses.
just self-care.
Oh, yeah.
And on that note, can we give a round of applause for our speakers?
Oh, thank you. Okay, so wait, I just to wrap it up, just kind of like to bookend this. Yeah. So thank you, amazing panel. You guys are amazing. In particular, thanks to Zak, who was the first one to agree to this panel last night at 7 p.m., and Seán Linehan, who was the last to agree to this panel at midnight last night, and then Darius Evans and Adrian Yoon, who have been passing the mic around, and they sort of instigated this Q&A, so thank you to you two.
And the thousands of people in the room.
And the thousands of people!
Thanks y'all for spending this afternoon here.
And in the show notes for this episode, I will have links to everybody's contact information here. Also, everything we've discussed, I'll find links for that, put it in here, including I have a list of accountants that are like New York based, LA based, that are industry based. And so if you're in need of that, you can go there and find some links. So thank you for sharing your time, your energy, and your experiences. And that's it. That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to pick them up here.
Cheers.
That's it for this week's episode, but don't run away just yet because I have a lot of takeaways and some clarifications. First, I do not condone using a baseball bat to solve problems. I just want that on the record, violence only in self-defense. I'm referring to some advice that was, how do you ensure you get paid? Kit fees. We heard numbers thrown out, $300 a day for film versus, well, I don't know, roughly $5 a day for theater. What it seems like. Okay, if you've listened to this show before, you might think that I am obsessed with kit fees and that I'm just trying to make fetch happen by talking about it all the time. But hey, somebody has to. And really, I just find it something that should be expected because depending on the type of designer or assistant you are, there is so much extra equipment, technology that we bring. And these are tools that are necessary for the job. And we're not bringing them for our health, but we're bringing value to the production. Christina mentioned that LORT contracts have designer reimbursements. And for context, I looked that up on the USA website, and they range from $285 to $485. Now, those are 2024 numbers. There are new numbers for 2025 through 2028, but they haven't been updated yet. So best case scenario for a LORT production, you're getting $485 reimbursed for your software and your overhead, etc. Now, I will throw out the caveat that the number column in the contract is blank, so special things could be negotiated per designer, but these numbers are sort of standard. Now, when I'm asking for a kit fee personally, I'm starting it at $25 a day. During the panel, I said that we each pay $5,000 a year for software. That's a conservative number because I'm not including Vor or Canva or Zoom or Photoshop. That is just Vectorworks, Lightwrite, Dropbox, and a computer. I take that $5,000 a year, I divide it by 52 5-day weeks, and that comes to $20 a day. And so my $25 really is sort of the bare bones cost, accounting for just a slight leeway. But I multiply that $25 times the days on site, and also sometimes add in prep days and include them in the prep days. And that is the number I aim for. And I'm only mentioning $25 because I think it's a very reasonable request, and it's a starting point if you're working in theater and you want to add this in, but theater isn't really expecting this coming at them. So $25 is the number that I'm comfortable with in theater environments. I do look for opportunities to push it higher, and I've certainly been denied it or had to cut it or reduce it more often than I've been successful in getting it. Mike mentioned verbiage included in the line item for design fee. Now, this isn't useful on a USA contract or a theater that has standard contracts, but it is good for other lighting situations. And I find myself that when I'm asked for a quote, I do tend to put everything line itemed out. Like, I'm not going to get, everything in there, but I found that people tend to look at the list or look at what I've set out and agree with it. And I find it also helpful when people end up saying, oh, we can't do that. Then we can sort of look at it and we both together can sort of pull things out or condense things. And it helps me get my days on site down, get things that I want while matching the number that they're willing to go with. Now, there was a question about assistance at LORT theaters. Now, I called Natalie Robin, who's the labor organizer for USA 829, and I asked her these questions just to make sure that I was giving you the correct information. So here's a clarification that there is no point system for entry into USA 829. Membership is through a review process, and depending on what region you're in, that is a little different. Now, there is a LORT Design Membership Candidate Program that can provide a pathway to joining the union. And to join that, you don't need permission. You merely have to get the LORT Theater to put you on a USA 829 contract and have them check the box for Design Membership Candidate, DMC. That does provide a pathway to membership by allowing assistants and associates to accumulate a certain amount of days and shows worked. So if you are an assistant listening, I'm putting 2 links in the show notes. One is to that direct cover sheet about the LORT DMC. The other is to the USA 829 website page that has all of the collectively bargained agreements. And the reason I'm including that link is that there's actually about 8 cover sheets of various LORT contracts, and they might have more information specifically to what you need. Specifically here, there are 2 different LORT assistant contracts. One is for A+ stages, and the others are for A through D stages. And both have the option for the DMC, and your theater is going to know which one they are, if they're A+ or an A through D contract. And it doesn't matter for our purposes. All it does is it moves where that checkbox is for the DMC box. The other part of the question to address is about the LORT theater, whether or not they have to put you on a USA 829 contract, and they do not. It is totally optional on their point. Now, I suspect that they will if you ask, because this isn't really a big lift for them. And certainly if you say, hey, I'm a part of the USA 829 Design Membership Candidate Program, can you put me on a USA contract and check the box that says DMC? I imagine that the response to that would be a yes. So if you're wondering, how do you do this? These are the exact steps you need to take. First, get the gig. And second, as you negotiate the contract and they email you, they're going to say it's going to be, $1,000, etc. You respond and you say, great, I'm a USA 829 design membership candidate. And as such, I'm going to want to be put on a USA 829 LORT assistant designer contract. And that is going to include checking the box that says design membership candidate. Can you confirm that that's possible? And if you need help locating that contract, I am happy to help. Okay, that was a little bit long-winded, but the third step is that they say, yes, we can do that. And then when they send the contract, you just make sure that the checkbox for design membership candidate is checked. Or they will say, yes, can you help us find that contract and fill it out correctly? And at that point, you go to the link in the show notes and find the LORT CBAs, and you find the correct form and you send it to them. And if you're really on top of it, you'll circle in red the DMC box, and then you'll send them a direct link to download the correct contract. And that's that. And yes, you can get your designer involved if needed. It's not going to hurt, but do the legwork yourself and just ask the designer for backup support if needed, which would really only be if they said we can't do that. And then you go ask your designer to get them involved and have them ask. And this is tying to a point I'm going to make later. But if the theater comes back and says, we can do that, but we need to reduce your fee by X amount to accommodate for that, then I would go to the designer and ask them to help push against that. But my guess is that you're not going to need a designer to get involved, and that the theater is going to agree to this if you ask them. Because if you want into USA 829 and you want to go this route, you've got it. You already know more than the theater does about the process because they just want to get the contracts processed. And so if you handhold them through it, that's half the battle. Because designers are just one small part of the entire show process, and they're just wanting to get them all squared away. Zak's story about getting a union contract on Rock of Ages, that's exactly how unions should work. It was just him and others forming an unofficial union in which to work with the GMs. It wasn't an official collectively bargained agreement. Now, I will say that was for a Broadway show, and the stakes there are pretty high. That's not necessarily going to be worth the effort on a smaller contract, as in it's worth it, yes, but you're going to have to do the same amount of organizing that Zak did on a, let's say, $1,000 contract that he did for a much larger contract. And Mike threw out, how much work is it to send a couple emails to sort of fact check things? Now, from my personal experience, however my brain works, it can be a lot of work to send just a couple emails, but it is worth it. It's always worth it because even if it doesn't result in the outcome you want, you're going to learn how to take a new approach the next time around. Okay, and the final union thing I'm going to bring up, and that is my union, USA 829, has requested me to ask any USA 829 members listening who have worked on an off-Broadway contract in the past 3 years to fill out a survey. And the reason for that is that the current off-Broadway collectively bargained agreement expires on June 30th. And the negotiation committee is in meetings prepping for that. And they want any and all opinions that can help in those negotiations. Things like, should we include a kit fee? I don't know, just a random example. So if you're listening and you're in USA 829 and this applies to you, find the link to that survey in the show notes. Ignore the deadline. They didn't get as many responses as they were hoping, so the deadline's been extended, but do fill it out as soon as possible, and certainly fill it out before April, which is when they have their final meetings to prep for those negotiations. Now, I actually have to admit that since I moved to St. Louis, I wasn't going to fill out this survey, but then I was reminded that I was the associate on Yiddish Fiddler during the holidays in 2022, and so I guess I have been on an off-Broadway contract within this time period. So I'm actually going to go fill this out once I stop recording here. Christina Watanabe mentioned making statements and asking for people to confirm. That is wildly efficient and just practical because, we're all busy. If you can sort of like solve the problem and present it to somebody and just say, does that sound good? You are much more likely to get your way. Or it's making them saying yes very easy. And then somebody did in the audience had said, get things in writing, ask your questions in writing. And that way, one, you get concrete answers, but you also have to get those answers at some point. And just having a paper trail is always helpful because you can say, well, I asked that question and nobody gave an answer. So I made up my own answer and this is what it is. And now we have to deal with it. I don't know, bad example, but something like that. Mike with his fake assistant, Janine, that sounds crazy, but also amazing. Now, I also want to tie in that we have mentioned a lot on the show that it's easier to advocate for somebody else rather than yourself. So this method would also allow you to separate yourself from the worker bee you so that you could argue for that worker bee designer and their needs, which is actually you, but you separate yourself. And if you're like me and you're not good at advocating for yourself, this could be like another layer to help fight for the imaginary Ethan designer. Like, my designer Ethan needs XYZ versus I need XYZ. Anyway, that's just another technique we can use if, like Mike was talking about, if he likes film better because he can be more honest about the money. Well, if you're stuck in theater and you're stuck in this dishonest sort of awkwardness, this is just one of those psychological tricks that can maybe help. I don't know. Christina mentioned logging into irs.gov to see what 1099s and W-2s have been reported. Now, I had no idea this was a thing, and so I went and logged in. And first off, I had said that it uses the credentials of login.gov. Well, it turns out it uses your login credentials for id.me. And irs.gov is different from ssa.gov, which is the Social Security site. Now, that site uses login.gov or id.me. But now I have both accounts, ye gods. Not to mention now you have to do a video selfie to log in. So I'm just saying, if you have multiple monitors that you use, make sure that you put the web browser you're using on the same screen that the camera is on, because it took me about 4 tries and the video selfie kept failing. And that was the issue that finally made it pass. Anyway, I got logged in and sure enough, you can get the W-2s and the 1099s and a long transcript by going and clicking to request a wage and income transcript. However, the only available information is from previous years. So on the site, it says that that information isn't available until earnings are reported. And I don't know if that's you, the taxpayer, reporting, or if that's the company's reporting. But either way, unless you file past the deadline, IRS Gov's records aren't going to help you find your 1099s or W-2s that you might be missing. So if you didn't get a 1099 or a W-2 sent to you or sent to the right address, so you never got it, the IRS would catch it. But in order for you to see it, you would have to go to that transcript and hope that it was available before you filed your taxes. But even if you do get it, you have to search through every 1099. And I looked through mine for last year, and it can be a bit confusing because, for example, the W-2 that I had from the lighting design group was only listed as like they just put the first part of the name. So there was no searching through for lighting design group. I wouldn't have found it. And the same thing for like the Lincoln Center, the 1099 was listed as the Lincoln. So I wouldn't have been able to type Lincoln Center. I would have to go through one by one and sort of find the one and decipher, like, is that abbreviation the one I'm talking about? Like, does that amount match up to what I'm thinking? But anyway, for 2024, they don't have anything available yet. So I wouldn't be able to go there and look for missing 1099s. And now I will just say this little thing, that if a company paid you less than $600, they're not required to report that by sending you a 1099. So for small amounts, you may not get the 1099s. And I know plenty of people who do not report amounts under $600. I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just saying. The question about agents, I just want to say that it was episode 164 that is pay negotiations for lighting designers. And then episode 176 is pay negotiations for agents and designers. And those are actually some of our most downloaded episodes. And I certainly recommend them because there's a lot of good stuff in there. Now, I want to point out a moment that was just so fleeting, but I want to bring attention to it because it highlights sort of why I started this podcast. And it really was just the briefest of moments. And that was when Mike Grabowski mentioned about paying people on union contracts, talking about adjusting the numbers to allow for a USA 829 contract. Now, I'm going to throw out a phrase here called virtue signaling. Now, it has a negative connotation, but I'm using it because it's not inherently bad, but I'm just trying to describe groupthink. And this is why I have the show, is so that we can talk about things, because a lot of times in the industry, there's groupthink and people say one thing, but it's not matching up to reality. And so what Mike said was a reality, that in order to do USA contracts, sometimes you do have to adjust the numbers because the producer says, okay, we have $10,000. You say, I want a USA 829 contract. And they say, okay, well, we have $10,000. So we have to adjust that. And in theater, it's a thing, I think, because numbers are so small, when you're only getting $1,500 and then to have to reduce that to allow for a contract, it can get dicey. So the politically correct and the union answer is, no, don't reduce the fee. That's not fair. And that's fine. And that's true and all that. But what Mike was talking about was reality and what actually happens. And I want to say it's January 31st. And already this year, I did a show. It was at the Black Rep, and the fee was $1,800. And I said I would like that on a USA 829 contract because I do all my stuff through there. They called me into a meeting, which seems ridiculous, but they called me into a meeting and they would not budge. And they said, we have to, in order to do this, we have to reduce your fee. So you have to make the decision. Do you want to reduce the fee or do you want to not do it on a union contract and get paid more? So I ended up getting a $1,480 contract, so $1,480, so that I could be on a USA 829 contract. But I bring it up because the panel responded to Mike with, well, last resort. And Mike, of course, was like, yes, absolutely, last resort. We don't want to do it that way, but it's the reality. By the way, this is in my own brain. I haven't talked this over with the panel. They probably don't even remember it happened, but it's an experience that I've had 1,000 times where I see somebody speaking the reality, but then the correct answer, the utopia answer, comes into the picture, and that's what everyone agrees on. And it's like, yes, yes, yes. There's a disconnect there. And that's what I'm just highlighting, is that this is one of those situations in which there's what happens in life, and then there's what you always hear everyone saying all the time. But you know in your brain, wait a second. So anyway, Mike handled that super well. He's an agreeable guy and all that. I also want to bring it up because when I agreed to reduce the fee to $1,480, there's a lot of emotion involved in that. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm a bad designer. I'm a bad union member. Just all these extra things that aren't really applicable because it's just numbers and it's just budgets. But if you as a designer have had this experience, just know you're not the issue. It's nothing lacking in you. This is just how it works, even though everyone around you in the union, et cetera, is probably saying, oh, don't do that. Or you don't want to share that with people that you have done that because the overarching public answer is, oh, never reduce your fee at XYZ. It happens. You got to do what you got to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. But anyway, enough about that. All right, the final takeaway, and that was the advice about learning how to talk about anything but the job or the project. Now, I'm not an outgoing person, and this is something I've navigated my entire life. And if you listen to this podcast, you might be fooled and think that I love to talk and talk and talk, but these are not social situations. And do trust me, I can turn it on sometimes. But overall, it is a challenge for me to be social. But I want to say that the gigs that I have had the most fun on tend to be the ones in which I do talk with people more and I am more social. Those obviously tend to lead to more gigs. Do listen to what Mike's saying there because I think it's easy for Mike. He is such a fun person to be around. He's great at chatting. I mean, he could chat to anybody. If you're not that way, do make a goal for yourself to be social for at least a little bit on every single gig you do. Like Mike said, once you have that level of proficiency at your job, it's then equally important about being fun to be around, not to just be sitting in front of the monitor or the console and trying to get the lighting perfect. Just get it fine, get it workable, and then go chat with people. And when you do that, and then you're then asked to do another gig, you can let me know and thank me then. So go be social. All right. Those are my takeaways. Thank you to the panel. That was such energy in the room. I just loved it. So thank you, panel. And a big thank you to Ellen at LDI for giving us that podcast studio to record in. Now, if you enjoyed this conversation and you want to help me keep them happening, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/artisticfinance. Your support goes directly toward keeping this podcast going and growing, hopefully. And most important in this moment right now, it will retroactively help me pay for my trip to LDI. Okay, and now you thought we were almost over, but just a couple updates on my life. First, I got a haircut, which was about 3 months overdue. Now, if you watch this on YouTube, you might have noted that my hair was just slowly getting shaggier and shaggier to a ridiculous level. But now I am a generic, clean-cut human being again. I feel 3 pounds lighter. I also just flew back from Phoenix. I was in Mesa and Tempe, remounting a show called Anthropocene. It was at ASU last year when I was teaching there, and they're remounting it for a touring version. It's all about the climate crisis, and they're hoping to take it to some climate change summits, etc., things like that. But it was amazing being back and seeing my former students. And students are like children in that once I was their professor, I think I'm always going to be their professor. And I also ran into the new lighting professor, and by ran in, I mean sought out, who I happen to know very well because he was the lighting supervisor at the Des Moines Metro Opera 15 years ago now when I was an electrician there. And I got to say, he is such a funny human being, like, which I always know, but I just don't get to talk to him that much. So the students there are lucky. They have a great professor and a great mentor. And of course, I got to see all my other former colleagues, other faculty and staff. And it was a little bit emotional for me, actually, in the greatest of ways. And the costume department in particular is just such a wonderful group of people. I just love chatting with them. And one of them actually called me out about the podcast because I have only been talking to lighting people on this show for about a year now. And my excuse is I've been moving across the country and it's just easy to talk to lighting people because I know them. But it does bring up a point that if you're listening and you want to hear from costume designers or set designers or other areas, I would love to get back to interviewing various people from the industry, not just lighting. So if you have people you want me to interview, send me a note and let me know because I'm looking to branch out here a little bit and get our other brethren in and chatting. I also got to see the ASU lighting supervisor, Danny Deutschman, and she was actually on our LDI episode in 2023. That's episode 163. But she was our production electrician. And if you remember from my stories from previous episodes, we were working in a space that didn't purchase lamps for their lights. So we showed up for focus, and yes, they got the lamps. That was good. But somehow the building is configured in a bunch of universes, and they all got patched and switched. So we ended up taking a 2-hour focus and turning it into an 8-hour focus because we had to reconfigure and truncate all of our universes down to just 2 and then rerun some cable to make sure they were all on the correct ports in the wall. But anyway, that meant I got to hang out with Danny for 8 hours instead of 2. So that was great for me. And I'm not going to lie, I did love in the middle of winter being out in the desert in the 60-degree weather. But of course, I did come home to Theo and Nicole. And so I did want to return to Missouri, even though we still have piles of snow from the 10 inches that we got a few weeks ago. And speaking of snow, let's wrap up this episode. So the dad joke to end the episode is, it is often pointed out that in the English language, one of the easiest words to spell is icy. And looking at it now, I see why. That's it for today. Until next time, break a leg.
Thank you for listening to Artistic Finance, where we interview successful artists, leaders, and investors to help educate and inspire the creative community. To access our show notes and resources, go to artisticfinance.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any decision, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Artistic Finance. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.